Happy to be here. Greetings, forward Singapore. Yes, so I'd like to talk about blockchain today. If we could go to the next page, please. I've got to disclose that there is risk in investing in disruptive innovation. I also will say, to be even-handed here, there's great opportunity of investing in disruptive innovation. Blockchain technology is one of the 5 major platforms around which ARK has centered its research. The others are DNA sequencing, robotics, energy storage, artificial intelligence. We think these 5 platforms are going to transform and disrupt the traditional world order. So if we could go to the next page, please. Yes, what does blockchain technology mean? Well, the simplest way to understand what is going on right now is when the internet evolved, coming out of DARPA, the government here in the US and governments around the world, actually, it was evolved not with commerce in mind. It was simply an information network used by intelligence agencies around the world, defense departments, and academia. And so there was never a payments ecosystem built into the internet to enable commerce. And so what we're seeing 20, 30 years later is this payments ecosystem evolving and becoming native to the internet. The most popular example of blockchain technology is Bitcoin. This is called a protocol. The entire network, crypto asset ecosystem, today is approaching $2 trillion in size. Bitcoin accounts for 900 billion. We have Ether at 400 billion. And then we have thousands of other crypto assets making up the other $700 billion. Each one of these, Bitcoin, Ether, and the other crypto assets are the protocols. In our view, the cryptocurrencies will probably accrue the most value over time. But I'd like to talk about how blockchain technologies are going to impact many sectors. So if we could go to the next page, please. Yes, the price of Bitcoin, before getting to how the impact on industries, the price of Bitcoin recently hit an all-time high, $64,000. In the 2017 hype cycle, we reached $20,000. So we are now, we have approached more than 3 times that. We've had a correction recently back to 45,000. There are many statistics that we use because blockchain technologies are open source ecosystems, fully transparent. So what is evolving is something called on-chain analytics associated with each of the protocols. And if we look at Bitcoin, which is the most popular one, and look at the on-chain analysis today relative to the statistics we had in 2017, we will see that we are nowhere near the hype in terms of those statistics that we saw in 2017. So this network is maturing. If we could go to the, one other thing I'd like to share, sorry, just back a bit. In terms of projecting forward, we've done a few exercises for Bitcoin specifically, because it is the largest protocol and it is the easiest to analyze right now. There are 2 that we have done associated with institutions. One involves companies, corporations, diversifying some of their cash into Bitcoin as countries around the world begin to accept Bitcoin. And in fact, in El Salvador, you may know, Bitcoin has been deemed legal tender. Paraguay and Ukraine are also considering using it as legal tender. So this idea of a diversification from cash into Bitcoin is gaining some momentum. You may know that Square, MicroStrategy, and Tesla are the first three companies to have diversified their asset base into some Bitcoin, roughly 5%. And we do think this movement will continue. If corporations were to diversify and put just 1% of their cash into Bitcoin, corporations around the world in the S&P 500, that alone would add $40,000 to today's $45,000 price. If institutions around the world were to allocate roughly 5% of their assets to Bitcoin in particular, that would add $500,000 to the price of Bitcoin. So taking it up more than tenfold, just to dimension how early we are and how much potential there is in this first protocol. So next slide, Pete, please. So here are some of the sectors that we believe are going to be impacted the most by crypto assets. I'm going to start at the lower right, monetary systems. Monetary systems, Bitcoin was the first rules-based global monetary policy really since the gold exchange standard. And it is the first private monetary system to exist. In other words, there are not human beings in governments overseeing this monetary system. My mentor, Art Laffer, a monetary scholar, his mentor was Robert Mundell, who won a Nobel Prize for his monetary theory. Art Laffer believes that we have been looking for this monetary system since the gold standard ended, and that it will bring real discipline into the system. Now, Bitcoin itself is based on the quantity rule. So the quantity will be fixed at 21 million units and is mathematically metered to stop there. Having met many of the core developers of the Bitcoin ecosystem, I can tell you one thing, that rule will not be violated. Right now, we're a little bit above 18 million units on our way to that 21 million. And I believe we are appreciating a little less than 2%, meaning the supply of Bitcoin is increasing by a little less than 2% per year. Every 4 years, that growth rate will be cut in half. And so the second sector is energy. Many people talk about Bitcoin and other crypto assets being energy hogs and very bad for the environment. We just completed a study with Square, collaborating with Square, and have evolved the theory somewhat to say, yes, it consumes a lot of electricity. If you were reading about the internet in its early days, that was a criticism about the internet. Many people say, well, Bitcoin alone is consuming as much energy as the country of Denmark. And that was the sort of story we heard in the day when it came to the internet. So this criticism is not new. What it does not capture, though, is the productivity gains and the cost collapse in many sectors that we're going to see thanks to blockchain technology. In our study with Square, we focused on Bitcoin, in particular, the Bitcoin mining ecosystem becoming a part of the utility ecosystem. And in so doing, we believe, and in tune with what your last speaker said, that the addition of mining, Bitcoin mining, to the crypto asset ecosystem, to the utility ecosystem around the world, will foster more solar growth than otherwise would be the case, because we will be over provisioning the grids with solar in many areas of the world. That can spill into mining and help the economics so that solar will proliferate at a much faster rate than otherwise would be the case. I'm going to spend most of the rest of my time on financial services and gaming. So let's go to the next page, please. So financial services, decentralized finance, DeFi, is evolving very rapidly. I think more rapidly than most realize. We have locked in the Ether network, the Ethereum network. We have locked value in DeFi approaching $120 billion. So of the $700 billion I mentioned that made up the Ether network, $120 billion of that is in DeFi, facilitated largely by stable coins, which are the bridge into Ether. Many countries are evolving their own stable coins right now and validating the space. Stable coins today, interestingly, also make up about $120 billion of value. Now, in DeFi, why is it proliferating so rapidly? Well, the search for yield is a very big reason. We are finding yields in the DeFi network anywhere from 3 to 4% to 20% if you go to the Terra network. Millennials in particular have been captivated by DeFi, but it's not just millennials. A lot of companies are evolving around the DeFi network, and we think it's going to scale enormously in the years ahead. And I think the reason we're so excited about it is the combination of open source technology and free markets that typically, when they are brought together, cause explosive growth. And we think this time is no different. The reason decentralized finance is proliferating is also because traditional financial companies are harnessing DeFi to cut their own costs. We think the costs of financial systems around the world are going to collapse during the next 5 to 10 years as we take more and more of the middlemen out of the process, more of the toll collectors out of the process. And we can get into DeFi if you'd like in the Q&A. The creator community is also very excited by the blockchain movement. The creator community is now going to have a way to really get paid anytime any other creator builds on top of another creator's work. So you've heard about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are also scaling enormously. We have been looking at the monetization of gaming for some time, and we think NFTs are going to be a big part of that. According to our analysis, in-game monetization today is $170 billion globally. And in the next 5 years, we expect it to grow to 350 to 400 billion. Now, we derived that estimate before we saw NFT values scale enormously this year. You've heard about some of the auctions. The first big one at $69 million for one piece. That might suggest a lot of froth in the market. And these markets do start out in that way, very unstable in the beginning. But we are taking it very seriously. And then finally, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. When I first heard this concept, I thought, wow, what is that? No CEO, no CFO, no suite whatsoever, but an organization controlled by users and a governance ecosystem with a voting mechanism via tokens. So we don't have time to go into that right now, but I'd be happy to address it in the questions. So the next slide, please, and the final slide. Here you can see the value in the Ethereum network. You can see that it is growing very rapidly. When we did this chart, which was at the end of last year, I believe there was $20 billion in value locked in DeFi. Today, as I mentioned before, just 8 months later, that is 120 billion. So up sixfold just since the end of last year. Again, high yields are attracting a great deal of interest. And we're seeing a lot of innovation in this space. And it's being expressed in the price of Ether, which itself has scaled to $4,000. So we're in a brave new world. Is very exciting, and I would be very happy to take your questions now.
Thank you, and so are we. Please submit them in the Q&A function next to this video player. You have about 15 minutes or so to get your question in. Kathy, we really appreciate you being with us so incredibly early in a New York morning. Thank you for doing so. Here's your first question. Here's your first question from one of your fans. She says she's been following you on YouTube for a year and says you're a legend. Her question, though, is rather serious, and that is about El Salvador and the fact that they have embraced it. She says, Kathy, certain governments and regulators are trying to keep the public from crypto rather than letting their people and their business communities embrace it. What's your message to those countries other than El Salvador?
Yes, very interesting and a very good question. China is one of the biggest countries that is really shutting down this open source free market ecosystem. And I really do believe any country that does shut it down is going to start losing out competitively in the innovation race. This is one of the 5 major platforms, as I mentioned before, that we see evolving. It is in its earliest days. And I think any country that tries to shut it down, and they can shut it down, we can see China doing exactly that. First of all, the activity will go elsewhere. You cannot shut down the network. So a country may not allow its people to use it, but the network will still be alive and well. And I'm sure the Chinese government will monitor and shut down anyone trying to access it. And so we believe that this would have been the equivalent of trying to shut the internet down in the early days of the internet. Just think where countries that did that would be today. In fact, I believe that it will become obvious that shutting down this open source free market is going to isolate countries from the rest of the world. And many will, I think, succumb and rejoin the movement. The others that do not are going to isolate themselves more and more. One other thing about China in particular, we believe that the 5 major platforms evolving today are going to enjoy convergences. And I think one of the most important brewing out there is the convergence of blockchain technology with artificial intelligence. And we're seeing, likewise in China, a crackdown on information flow. And so on those two scores, blockchain and artificial intelligence, China and some other countries, but I think China is most in the news today, are going to be shutting themselves out of one of the most provocative sources of innovation and sources of productivity growth and wealth creation in the history of the world.
But not just China, Kathy. There are many governments that fear losing control over their monetary systems. Those toll gatekeepers, I suppose, that you mentioned earlier, they're obviously scared for their lunch.
Yes, I agree with you. We're seeing in the United States, for example, intense lobbying now, finally. I thought it would happen earlier, but in the early days of blockchain technology, like many other early technologies, regulators and business people didn't really think much of it. It was a curiosity. It seemed to be fringe technology. But now, because we are seeing it encroach on the financial services industry and actually taking share away from it, we are seeing in the United States much more concern. I think the banking lobby is alive and well and is beginning to understand that blockchain technology is going to hollow out its business. I was on a podcast very recently. I think it's called Bankless, LESS. And the conversation evolved, and we arrived at a moment where they said, wait a minute, you think it's already impacting the banking industry to such an extent that they're worried? Because in the world of Ethereum and Bitcoin, it seems to be very isolated and innovation oriented, very focused on moving forward as fast as possible. They're not really paying attention to the banking industry. Well, I am, and I listen to a number of banking earnings reports or read the transcripts each earnings season. And when I hear Jamie Dimon saying, loan growth will be negative for the rest of this year, he said this earlier this year. And I was thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, we're in a V-shaped recovery. When in a V-shaped recovery have we ever seen negative loan growth? And it dawned on me that even though the Ethereum network and DeFi are just nipping at the heels of banks, if DeFi is taking share now, what may be happening is what always happens with a new movement. Companies dismissing it say, that doesn't, that part of my business is, they're not taking much of that part of my business. It's huge business. It's, not impacting it much at all. But what you don't hear is that these new ways of doing things are taking more than all of the growth. It may be a small part. I mentioned the ecosystem, DeFi ecosystem today is $120 billion in market cap, effectively, compared to the banking industry, which is 9 to 10 trillion globally. So it seems like it shouldn't have much of an impact, but it's exploding at a 50 to 100 to 200% rate. As I mentioned earlier, we went from we have accelerated to sixfold this year. That is taking a lot of business from somewhere. Could it be that it is taking more than all of the growth rate from loans in the JP Morgan ecosystem? Hard to believe, but I have seen innovation at work all my life. I've been in the business 44 years, and this has a familiar ring to it. It's nothing until it's really something.
But Kathy, I don't know anybody who's taken out a loan in Bitcoin. Did Jamie Dimon not explain why this V-shaped recovery isn't yielding any loan growth?
He did not. Except to say corporations and consumers are flush with cash, and especially after the stimulus payments from the government. So I think that's why most people think that loan growth is not occurring. So they're taking him at face value on that. But it's not so much in Bitcoin that there's the lending and saving market evolving. It is around the Ethereum network. So that $400 billion network is where most of the DeFi opportunities are, most of the very high yields. When you think about it, we think the bond market, certainly, the corporate and treasury market, we think they're in a bubble. The search for yield has reached an extreme level over the last few years. Well, now, when people who are adventurous and risk takers see 4 to 20% yields on the Ethereum network, they're migrating to it. I think the big concern for those who have been watching this is, wait a minute, could there be huge leverage evolving on this network? And yes, it is evolving quite quickly, but the collateral associated with the loan market is such that in May, when there was a horrific correction in Ether and Bitcoin went from 64,000 to, I think it dropped below 30,000. So we're still in that very unstable and volatile part or period for this evolving ecosystem. But we watched very carefully what happened to the leverage and the what's called the hash rate, the activity on the Ethereum network in particular. And what we saw was the collateral was enough so that Ether did not skip a beat. The Ethereum network did not skip a beat. But what did happen is those individuals who were over their skis, shall I say, didn't understand what they were doing, they lost everything. So it's an area where those experimenting are from time to time during these moments of volatility, they are being sacrificed actually for a time there. 1 million people a day were just cashed out and the ecosystem got their collateral. So it's unstable, but the ecosystem is robust today.
A couple more questions, Kathy. In fact, we've got quite a few coming in. This one is about China. What's your view on investing in blockchain in China, and which areas? Cryptocurrencies themselves, exchange platforms, other blockchain applications? Because as we know, China has invented its own version of Twitter, its own version of Facebook. Who knows? Before long, they might have their own version of Bitcoin.
Right. Well, they are with the digital yuan. I think China would like the yuan to be the reserve currency of Asia, broader Asia, and so yes, they are doing. They're putting a lot of effort behind that. So I would look at that. They're certainly evolving the technology, and we know they know how to move at scale. So we're watching that very carefully. I can't say we've seen much from it yet. It does seem like the move towards common prosperity might be a part of that as well. And they are trying to get their house in order, whatever the social concerns are in China about the divide between the rich and the poor, which is a problem we all are facing around the world. They seem to want to get that under control first. They want to control their information. and so forth. And then I think they'll feel ready to proliferate the currency more broadly. Now, I would love to know from the questioner, what you all are seeing there. Are you seeing any success? We know that WeChat Pay is a platform that has enjoyed enormous success, and the reason we still have an investment in Tencent, although we have taken our positions in China down dramatically, given the recent moves against capitalism in that country. But we think that Tencent will be an enabler for the digital yuan to proliferate, and so we're watching that carefully.
Kathy, here's another one. Of course, when you see an asset fall by 25% of its value from its peak, like Bitcoin has in a very short space of time, which other asset class does that ever happen to? Hence this question about balancing the fundamental thesis of Bitcoin and its speculative nature. Thank you if you were the one who asked this question. Should Bitcoin be held for the long term, Kathy?
We believe that it should be held for the long term. We are in very early days. Just a few companies have diversified any of their cash into Bitcoin. That has a long way to go. I think when it comes to the institutional world, we are seeing an accelerated movement into digital assets. Yesterday, we saw Fidelity increased. It has said it's going to increase employment in the digital asset space by 70%. Just earlier this year, they said they had already ramped it to a double. So we have a double and then a 70% on that. Why? It is because we believe what's going to happen in this space is what happened to emerging markets in the early days of investing in emerging markets. I started in the business in the late 70s and saw how the emerging markets evolved. MSCI became very important because it basically created the category emerging markets, and each emerging market had idiosyncratic risks. So packaging them together increased returns and lowered the risks relative to one by one. We think the same thing is going to happen in terms of institutional investment. It'll start with 1 or 2% and then move to 5%. It was happening to real estate in the 70s, emerging markets in the 80s and 90s. And we think the new version of that is crypto assets. And we do believe it's going to be a massive movement.
Okay, here's the next one for you. Most of blockchain platforms are focusing on crypto ecosystems. You mentioned DeFi, NFTs, DAO, while only few are focusing on real-world use cases. Although I have to tell you, the cafe downstairs in my building accepts Bitcoin. Which direction do you see institutional money will flow into in the future?
Well, I do believe if we are able, and I say we because we wrote the paper with Square on this, I do believe that crypto will have a role in the renewables world. I think adding Bitcoin to that energy ecosystem, merchant power producers and grids, so that the spillover from solar or wind in very sunny climates especially moves into mining and creates so much more economic value that investing in solar and wind and other renewables is going to scale at a much more dramatic pace than I think many people now anticipate. I think that certainly is a real world benefit associated with the evolution of these ecosystems. And I'm sorry, the question, if you could just repeat, there were two parts to it.
Yes, in terms of the real world nature of the real world use cases, we haven't really seen that. And therefore, where should institutional money go?
Oh, yes. We believe that most of the value will be accrued in effectively the currencies associated with each ecosystem. That's why we think the institutional movement will be more into the cryptocurrencies at the outset than the other crypto assets. But I would say in terms of this notion that, we can't see any real world applications. I remember in the early 90s, actually in the United States, consumers were not allowed to use the internet until the late 80s, which seems mind-blowing today. But at that time, no one could have seen the internet as one of the biggest commerce engines we've ever seen. And we just think that this is the native payment ecosystem, so that as the physical world goes digital, and we think transportation is one of the most important opportunities out there. As the physical world goes digital, these cryptocurrencies will become a part of those ecosystems. And here I'm thinking of autonomous taxi networks. In the late 80s, early 90s, we couldn't imagine how the internet was going to change our lives. I think many people are thinking cryptocurrencies will collapse the cost for financial institutions. I think that's true, but I think the benefits are going to go way beyond that.
Okay, and we're going way beyond our allocated time today. If you have to leave us, please check your email for the link for tomorrow's forward, which starts in about 21 hours from now. And you can work that out depending on where you're currently based. But Kathy, we've got lots of questions. It seems a few central bankers among you. Kathy, what is your opinion about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, in terms of implementation, popularity, and their impact on existing cryptocurrencies?
Yes, we believe CBDCs are going to be controlled by the monetary authorities in countries. And so they're the digital version of cash in each of these countries. They are adding credibility to the movement towards digital currencies. But as I described very early on, the Bitcoin in particular is the first global private digital currency. The CBDCs are going to be country by country, obviously. They're going to be controlled by the monetary authority. So that monetary policy, which increasingly around the world has not been rules-based, and many people would say appropriately so, given what we went through with the coronavirus. And we do think, depending on the implementation country by country, that there could be a lot of disintermediation of the traditional banking system as the central banks, as we can go, central bank to consumer or business. So we're waiting to see how financial institutions work with governments and vice versa to become involved in those ecosystems. They don't have to be. So we actually are waiting upon more information from central banks in different countries to learn about implementation and how much of the financial institution cost base they're going to take out of their respective ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, what is your opinion of permissioned blockchain run by IBM and R3? Will it directly compete with permissionless blockchain in terms of real-world use cases?
Well, I don't hear that much about R3. We focused on it intensively in the early days as we were trying to study the difference between private and public blockchains. I'd like to use an analogy here. We don't think private blockchains are going to go anywhere at scale. They may have some specific use cases, but if you think about in the old days, there was something called and still is today, intranet, intercompany, versus internet between all kinds of entities. And then later on, there was the private cloud. In fact, many financial institutions in the early days of the public cloud said they would never use the public cloud because their information was, too private, and they needed to keep it secure. So they went the private cloud. So yes, they pulled all of their servers and storage out of each office building, but they controlled it. And they stayed away from the public blockchains. That is changing as well. We think permissioned is like intranets or private private cloud. And we think that they won't scale and they won't present the economic benefits that public and public blockchains, permissionless blockchains will present.
Okay. 2 more questions. We'll wrap by the top of the hour. Are you concerned that most of the loans made in the crypto networks are not real in the sense that they're not made for economic activity, but mostly for speculative reasons?
Well, the early days of any technology is filled with speculation, so it doesn't surprise me. I'm more interested in the yield side of it, just to because that's what the lure. It's enabling the yield side of the ecosystem. So we're watching much more the governance of these networks in the DeFi world, the kind of collateral they're demanding, how they are managing to evolve through the booms and busts. So again, very early days, booming and busting. But the ecosystem is getting stronger with each bust because governance intensifies as users try to make sure to prevent, any ruptures in their ecosystem. And I have to tell you, I've been very surprised at how robust the DeFi ecosystem is. The one we're watching, and the one I've listened to the podcast, the founder of the Terra network offering a fixed 20% yield. I'm suspicious of that one, frankly. But I might have to go listen to the podcast again because he tells a good story. But as an economist by training, I can't understand the ecosystem yet. So there are a few out there. I'm sure there are more than a few ecosystems that are going to run into trouble. I'm not saying Terra necessarily is one of them. I just need to understand it better. So yes, we're in early days, boom, bust, and just like all technologies, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of speculation, and again, it's helping to build out the ecosystem. And it helps investors to understand the governance in the ecosystem with each decline. And as you know, this last one was not 25%; it was more than 50% in just a few months. So we're getting tests, and the networks are anti-fragile. What doesn't kill them makes them stronger.
Right. Final question, one to challenge you, Kathy. Blockchain tech is great. Thank you for submitting this one. But how is it possible to replace the currency backed by a government? Why would a country be willing to accept something that may challenge their own issued currency?
Well, in the case of El Salvador, and we did predict this would happen, a lot of countries are run by regimes that the population doesn't trust. And what we're seeing with El Salvador is a young leader. He's considered somewhat authoritarian, but he's a kind dictator so far, at least, that the people do trust. What we believe he's doing is he's going to attract innovation to Salvador. We would not. They just put in place some tax benefits of being a part of the crypto ecosystem in El Salvador. So we would not be surprised to see innovation flock to countries that are willing to adopt cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And the other thing that will benefit them is, the biggest threat to emerging markets, particularly those with dollar-denominated debt, is the depreciation of their currencies relative to the dollar. If you look at Bitcoin, December to December for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, there have been significant increases in Bitcoin relative to the dollar. And so and El Salvador might be trying to protect its country from the currency crises that, cause tremendous poverty and hold countries back. So I really believe he's adopting this with the idea that El Salvador will pull ahead of other Latin American countries. And I think he may have set off some competition here, because we are hearing Paraguay's now thinking about deeming Bitcoin legal tender, as is Ukraine. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed. Kathy, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, especially so early for the morning. And have a good breakfast. Hopefully we'll see you again in person very soon. Kathy Wood
Hopefully. Thank you so much.
Have a great day
Thank
ahead.
You.